Oh, gross. Babe, I think the dogs made a mess by their bed. What's up, guys? Today I'm going to be going over my Eugene deck profile, and in case you didn't know, Eugene is basically a meme, and so my deck list may not be the most broken, but I have had a lot of fun and a little bit of success with it. So let's start it off. First, I've got your basic Eugene ride line, going from your 0, 1, 2, then 3, of course. My starter being the Eugene starter. He's pretty neat. You can start off with Sunrise Egg if you want to, and actually that might trick your opponent into thinking you're playing Overdress. A moderately good deck instead of this one. But I also run this guy. Basically, when you ride on him with the grade 2, you get the Soul Charge 1 that helps you fuel Eugene. It helps you fuel your soul for prison, paying prison costs, because inevitably you're going to end up fighting against prison, which is a decent matchup for you. But yeah, you want to soul charge in this deck to try to get Eugene's skill off, possibly, but then never use it. Grade 2, I've got this guy here, which whenever Eugene rides upon him, you draw a card and then choose a card from your drop and put it into your soul. It's decent. It fuels your soul with something from drop, which you'll inevitably have because you've been discarding for the ride deck. On top of that, you get to draw a card, so a little bit of advantage replacing the man himself, Eugene. Eugene's really neat because what you do with him is you have an act skill, you rest 2 rear guards, and you pop one of your opponent's rear guards, and then you get plus 10,000 power on Eugene. If you've retired something from your opponent's side of the field this turn, you can Soul Blast 5. Look at the number of cards from the top of your deck that is the same number as the number of open rearguard circles. So if they have 3 empty rearguard circles, then you can look at 3 cards. If they have 5 empty rearguard circles, you look at 5 cards. Call any number of cards from among them onto the rearguard circles, and then the rest go into your soul. Basically, you'll Soul Blast 5 to Soul Charge 3 and get possibly 2 triggers on the board. But yeah, he's a lot of fun to play. Not super great right now, but I'm hoping that Set 2 and Set 3 will help a little bit. Considering Set 2 seems to have mostly gone to Overdress and Overlord, I'm not expecting much for him, but we'll find out when Set 2 comes out. So, let's get into the main deck. First, we've got Persona Riding, because Persona Riding is good in every deck, especially this one. So you gotta Persona Ride Eugene in order to get some extra power to your front row rear guards. Your rear guards aren't super strong in this deck, unfortunately, since it's rear guard centric, and you really need that plus 10k to your front row in order to put much pressure onto your opponent. Otherwise, they're not really going to be that scared of a 15k swing coming at them. So yeah, you definitely want to Persona Ride with Eugene in this deck. Plus, it helps you get Soul. Then I've got 4 copies of Tribash. Tribash is actually a decent card. It's really funny when people don't expect it, because you can put 2 of these things on the field and then just get 3 crit on Eugene. He's swinging for 23, 3 crit. It's pretty funny, but it doesn't work all that often. So basically his skill is if your opponent only has, I think it's 2 or fewer, right, rear guards, then you can, when your Vanguard attacks, put this into your soul, and your Vanguard gets a critical. So yeah, you can have 2 of these things on rear guards. Usually I kind of put them in the back rows, rest them both for Eugene's skill if I don't have anything else to rest, which you'll see in my grade 1s, and then you put them into soul to get 2 extra crit on Eugene, or put 1 into soul to get an extra crit on Eugene if I want to save the other one for later. So yeah, now let's move on to grade 2s. I run Stealth Rogue of the Iron Blade, Oshikuni? Yeah, Oshikuni. So I've got 4 of these boys because he gets plus 5k if your opponent has 2 or fewer rear guards, so it's a decent attacker. He at least gets up over the 13k of any of your opponent's Vanguards. So that's why I run him, really, is just because with an 8k boost, he hits, you gotta drop a 15k shield against him. He's really not that great, but it's what the deck has right now, not what it needs. Then I run 3 Hungersauruses. Hungersaurus basically says if anything's in your opponent's front row, then you can't attack their Vanguard with this card. You have to attack one of their rear guards. but he gets plus 5,000 power. So again, a 15k swing. The good thing about Eugene is, basically, since you're not leaving anything on your opponent's field, hopefully, you end up not having a front row rear guard to have to worry about attacking with this guy. And if you do, your opponent does have a front row rear guard to worry about attacking with this guy, then you just attack it and you pop it, and you're doing what Eugene wants to do anyway, and you're taking away resources from your opponent. So I find him to be a pretty decent card in this deck, just because he either gets the power, or you get to attack a rear guard that your opponent has to decide whether it's worth saving with a probably 15k guard if it's a grade 2 on rear. So yeah, decent card in Eugene, definitely coming out whenever the next even single thing comes out for Eugene. Then I've got 2 other grade 2s. I've got the special Interceptor guy. When he intercepts, you can Soul Blast 1, gets plus 5k shield till the end of the battle. Basically, you're just going to attack with it if you called it with Eugene's skill or whatever. Then you're just going to intercept with it because it's a 10k guard. They're decent because they do save some shield from your hand whenever you're like, oh dang, I could guard this with 10k, but there's only 5s and 15s. And then this guy comes along and is like, hey, I'll give you 10k if you just intercept with me instead of placing me from hand. And you go, sure. And yeah, he's okay because he adds a little bit of defensive power to Eugene's call skill, but it really isn't fantastic, especially if you have a hard time keeping soul for whatever reason, which you shouldn't in this deck ever. Then I run 3 copies of Stealth Dragon Tinsha Stead. Persona Riding is good, so search out your Persona Rides. This deck doesn't really use that much Counterblast anyway, at least in my experience, so Tinsha Stead's a pretty good option, considering it does get out of the way for Eugene's skill, and it searches your Persona Rides out so that you can get the draw, get the plus 10k power to your front row, like we talked about is really important in Eugene, and helps keep the deck a little bit more consistent. Then I run 4 Stealth Fiend Shigamanago. Terrible with these names because I haven't read these names most of the time, because most of them are coming out of the deck as soon as they can. This card's okay though. Stealth Fiend Shigamanago has the skill that whenever one of your opponent's rear guards is retired during your main phase, so it has to be basically with Eugene's skill or other things that retire during the main phase, which Overdress doesn't have, so they're trying to keep these 2 lanes separate. Whenever your opponent's rear guard is retired during their main phase, you can retire this card, look at the top card of your deck, and either call it or put it in a soul. Basically, it gets you a soul, and it's a good target, or it gets you a card, and it's a good target for resting with Eugene's skill, because it's going to retire, and then you're either going to call something a stand or soul charge in order to use Eugene's skill to call something to replace it. So, yeah, this is a decent card. I don't know that it'll stick around if Eugene gets stuff. I honestly haven't done much more testing than just trying to build this deck for Eugene. I've been more worried about Bastion and Nirvana. But yeah, this is a decent card. I think getting a little bit of filter and putting things into your soul and stuff is pretty decent. It just really sucks whenever you check the over trigger with this thing and put it into soul or call it to the rearguard circle. Next, I've got 3 extra copies of Nigel, with the 4th being in the ride deck. Nigel's another good target for tapping with Eugene's skill. So what you do is you place Nigel, you rest it for Eugene's skill. Whenever you retire something, then his skill procs, which is that you can counterblast, retire him, and retire another one of your opponent's rear guards, because your opponent's rear guard was retired with Eugene's skill. This card's pretty decent. It uses a counterblast, which kind of stinks, but also doesn't really matter because this deck doesn't really use counterblast all that much. But yeah, it's really good to use whenever you need to really clear out your opponent's field. It's good to have 2 of them if your opponent has 5 circles filled, because then you can pop 3 things if you've got 2 open counterblast, and then replace a lot of your field with Eugene's skill. So I like this card. It's really unique, and I like the way that they're kind of thinking about Eugene. I just don't like the execution so far. And then I've got 4 copies of the Booster Set 1 PGs because, well, I've already said this in all my other deck profiles. Booster Set 1 PGs are the best PGs. If you can't get Booster Set 1 PGs, that's okay. Play with the trial deck ones. But these will save your butt more often than you really expect, because you can have 2 of them in hand. If they're your last 2 cards, you can use both of them without having to discard. And it really can be a lifesaver for sure. Alright, so trigger lineup. I run the Cray Elemental Overtrigger. I run the Cray Elemental Overtrigger because restanding Eugene doesn't do much for you, whereas if you can put plus 100 million power in each of your columns, that's a little bit scarier, in my opinion. Eugene's main problem is power, so telling your opponent basically you've got 2 2 PGs or else you're going to get hit by one of these is much better, in my opinion, than restanding Eugene and whiffing because you soul charged all your triggers. Then my trigger lineup is 3 draw triggers and 8 front triggers. Now you may be wondering why I don't run crits. And 4 heals, of course. I don't run crits because you need power in Eugene. You need to defend your front row rear guards, so checking a front trigger defensively is really good. And you need your front row rear guards to have power because Eugene's basically the only thing that gets power besides a measly 5k for the grade 2s I showed. But Eugene's the only thing that gets a major boost in power, as opposed to, Nirvana, who your Overdress units are getting power on their own and all that stuff. So you really want to run fronts, in my opinion, because it helps you defensively and offensively. Without that power, you're not really getting much fear out of your opponent, much pressure on your opponent. And on top of that, whenever you swing with Eugene and you put Tribashes into the soul, if your opponent is brave enough to 2 pass you, and then you check a front, that's definitely going to be a lot easier of a read for you to make than if you check a crit. So I personally run fronts because it's a little easier to read situations with them, especially with something like Eugene. It's already so weak that the crit's probably not going to get through anyway. And the fronts also will help save your rear guards a little bit better than a crit would, whereas a crit would just save Eugene. So yeah, that is my deck profile for Eugene. Let me know if you guys enjoy these kinds of deck profiles. I know these are all just kind of my builds and aren't really anyone else's, so you're not getting anyone else's opinion on these things. I do want to get some deck profiles from some of my friends as well on here. I want to talk to them and make sure that they're okay with that. Recording some deck profiles and giving you the lowdown on how they think through these decks and how they kind of the game plans of their. Right now I feel like Overdress is pretty widen out a lot whenever we get into sets 2 and 3. So I'm definitely looking forward to having more builds of different decks kind of roaming around, like a more aggressive Nirvana and a more tempo Nirvana, a more passive defensive stall Eugene as opposed to a more aggressive, I'm going to kill you before I even get to turn 3 Eugene. That's kind of what I'm looking forward to, and I'm hoping that we end up getting that from Bushiroad, because I think having different strategies work in the same deck is really what makes a lot of card games a ton of fun, and really makes the different builds and different deck profiles like this really matter. But yeah, Eugene is a ton of fun. If you haven't picked him up yet, go ahead and pick him up. He's like, I think if you get the booster set 1 PGs, he's like maybe 40, 50 bucks to build. Definitely get in contact with some of your friends. They may have some extra Eugene pieces laying around, and just have a blast with the game, guys. It's a fun game. But yeah, I really appreciate you guys watching. I hope that this has kind of made you think about building Eugene, or at least think about different ways of approaching different decks that you haven't tried before. I appreciate the support. I'll see you guys next time.